I found out about the condo on a Tuesday afternoon. Not from my husband, from a real estate notification that arrived in my email by mistake. The property listing showed a stunning $12 million penthouse in the city's most exclusive neighborhood. The buyer's name made my stomach drop, James Ashford. My husband. Our shared account. Our money. My name is Alexandra. I'm 42 years old, and I'd spent 14 years building a life with James that I thought was solid. That afternoon, everything cracked. I didn't scream. I didn't call him or text him in anger. Instead, I read the listing 3 times, took a screenshot, and filed it away in a folder I created on my personal laptop. My hands felt steady as I continued working at the boutique I'd built from nothing. Mrs. Patterson came in looking for summer dresses, and I helped her find the perfect white linen number. She had no idea that my entire world had just shifted. When I got home that evening, James was already there, showering. I could hear the water running from our bedroom. I sat on the kitchen counter and stared at my phone. $12 million. Our money. With a woman whose name I didn't even know yet. The silence after his shower was deafening. James came downstairs in his silk robe, kissed my cheek like nothing was wrong, and asked what was for dinner. I made pasta. We ate in the dining room where we'd hosted countless dinner parties. We talked about his work, the summer weather, whether we should repaint the guest bathroom. Normal things. Surface things. My mind was racing beneath my calm exterior. After 14 years of marriage, I knew James better than I knew myself. I recognized the patterns. The new gold watch he'd been wearing for 3 weeks. The way he'd started going to the gym every morning at 6. The new cologne that smelled nothing like anything we'd chosen together. The late nights he claimed were client dinners, but that never resulted in any business news. I'd been observant long before today. I just hadn't wanted to believe what I was seeing. That's the thing about betrayal. Sometimes you notice the signs and pretend they don't exist because admitting they're real means your whole life has to change. Tonight, though, I couldn't pretend anymore. The condo made it real. Concrete. $12 million real. Thursday evening, we were invited to dinner at the Hendersons' house. They were friends of James's from his investment firm. I wore a black dress that James had always loved, styled my hair, and applied makeup carefully. When we arrived at their modern mansion, I felt like I was playing a character in a movie about my own life. There they are. Patricia Henderson rushed to hug us both. Come in, come in. Everyone's already here. I smiled and held James's hand as we entered their home. Inside, I watched him. The way he stood taller when talking about his latest deals. How he laughed at jokes that weren't funny. How his eyes drifted away sometimes, like his mind was somewhere else. Somewhere with someone else. During dinner, I remained perfectly composed. I asked about Patricia's charity work. I laughed at appropriate moments. I was the perfect wife. Meanwhile, James was becoming someone I didn't recognize. Not obviously different to these people, but to me, he was a stranger sitting in my husband's body. You're quiet tonight, Patricia whispered to me as we cleared dishes. Everything okay? Just tired, I said. It's been a long week. She squeezed my arm sympathetically. None of them knew. They had no idea what was happening beneath the surface of our carefully maintained life. I let my mind drift back to the beginning, to when James and I were both broke. I was 24, working 3 jobs to support myself through business school. He was 26, working in a junior position at a small investment firm. We met at a coffee shop where I was working the morning shift. He ordered the same thing every day. Black coffee, extra shot, and a blueberry muffin. You have great taste, I told him once, handing him his order. He smiled and said, I'm more interested in the person serving it. We started dating within a week. We were poor together, happy together. I remember him studying late into the night while I made us cheap ramen and terrible jokes to keep him awake. When my boutique idea came to him one night, I'd been sketching designs on napkins. He believed in it before I did. This is going to be huge, he'd said, kissing my forehead. I'm going to invest everything I have. He did. We both did. My fashion sense and business instincts. His financial knowledge and connections. The boutique grew. Then it exploded. By the time we were 30, we had more money than we'd ever imagined. But somewhere along the way, James forgot who'd helped him build it. Or maybe he just decided I wasn't enough anymore. The first major red flag appeared on my bank statement 2 months earlier. A transfer of $300,000 to an account labeled Ashford Ventures Capital. I'd asked James about it at the time. He said it was a new investment opportunity, something he was managing separately. He told me with such confidence, such certainty, that I'd accepted it without pushing further. But now, with the condo purchase in mind, I pulled up every bank statement from the past year. My eyes moved across columns of numbers, spotting patterns I'd ignored before. 50,000 here, 120,000 there, all labeled as business expenses or investment opportunities, all funneling into accounts or purposes I couldn't quite trace. The condo wasn't the first large transaction. It was just the biggest one. It was the one that made the pattern impossible to ignore. It was the one that broke through my denial. I created a spreadsheet that night. Every transaction, every date, every amount. By the time I finished, the sun was coming up and I had a complete picture of financial betrayal. James had been systematically moving our money we'd built together for over a year. My best friend Victoria called Friday morning. "Let's get lunch," she said, her voice bright with the kind of enthusiasm only she could manage before noon. "I haven't seen you in forever." We met at our favorite Italian place downtown. Victoria immediately ordered wine, which was unusual for a Friday lunch. She stared at me over her menu with that look she'd perfected over 20 years of friendship. "Okay, what's going on?" she demanded. "What do you mean?" I asked, buying time. "You look like someone just told you the world is ending." "Actually, you look like you already knew the world was ending and you've been processing it all week." She leaned forward. "Is it James?" I should have told her everything right then. I should have showed her the spreadsheet, the condo listing, all the evidence of his betrayal. Victoria would have marched straight to James's office and told him exactly what she thought of his behavior. She would have encouraged me to hire the most aggressive divorce lawyer in the state. Instead, I shook my head. "I just need to figure something out on my own first," I said quietly. "Can we talk about this later?" Victoria wasn't happy about it, but she respected my boundaries. She always did. What I didn't tell her was that I was already making plans. Plans that required silence. James was getting bolder. The same week I had lunch with Victoria, he came home and casually mentioned that he'd be going to the beach for a work conference. 3 days. Oceanside. His tone was light, his expression unconcerned. I knew he was lying. There was no conference. There was a woman. He'd also started leaving his phone face down on the table, face down on the counter, face down everywhere. When it buzzed, he'd glance at it quickly and smile to himself before putting it away again. The arrogance was breathtaking. He actually thought I was too distracted, too caught up in running my boutique, to notice. "Have a good trip," I told him as he packed his suitcase Sunday morning. "I will," he said, kissing my cheek. "I'll miss you." The lie was so smooth, so practiced, that I wondered how many times he'd said it before. How many times I'd believed it while he was already mentally somewhere else. I watched him leave from the window. Then I did something I'd never done before. I called a lawyer. Her name was Diana Chun, and she came highly recommended. Her office was on the 42nd floor of a downtown building, all glass and steel and quiet competence. She listened while I laid out everything. The condo purchase, the bank transfers, the increasingly obvious signs of infidelity. I showed her the spreadsheet I'd created, the bank statements printed and organized by date. "This is thorough," she said, and something in her tone told me she was impressed. "Have you confronted him?" "No," I said. "I wanted to understand the full picture first." Diana nodded. "Good instinct. What we need to do is hire a forensic accountant, someone who can trace every dollar and build an airtight case. The money trail will tell us exactly what he's been doing and where our marital assets have gone." "How long will that take?" I asked. "Depends on the complexity, but given what you've already documented, probably 2 to 3 weeks. She paused. "I have to ask, are you sure about this? Divorce is messy, even in the best circumstances." I thought about the condo, about James's arrogance, about 14 years of building something together, only to have him steal from it. "I'm sure," I said. The forensic accountant Diana hired was a woman named Patricia Williamson. She was in her late 50s, with sharp eyes that seemed to see through layers of deception with ease. We met on a Thursday afternoon in Diana's office. Patricia brought 3 large folders filled with notes and preliminary findings. "I've been looking at your accounts," Patricia said, opening one of the folders. "The pattern is very clear. Your husband has been systematically transferring funds to shell accounts and investment vehicles under his name alone. It started about 14 months ago and accelerated significantly in the last 3 months." She showed me a chart she created, a visual representation of money flowing out of our shared accounts like water through a broken dam. The $12 million condo purchase appeared as a massive spike at the end of the chart. "He's not even trying to hide it well," Patricia continued. "The accounts are in his name. The properties are in his name. Once the divorce proceedings start, these will all be considered marital assets. Every dollar he moved is traceable." I felt something inside me settle. Not peace exactly, but confirmation, validation. I wasn't imagining things or overreacting. The betrayal was real, documented, and quantifiable. "There's something else," Patricia said, turning to another page. "I found evidence that he took out several loans against properties you own jointly. The collateral includes your family home and the building where your boutique operates." My heart stopped. What? The family home had belonged to my grandmother. She'd left it to me specifically, written it clearly in her will. James had always resented that I'd kept it in my name only, had repeatedly suggested we put it both on the deed. I'd always refused, something in my gut warning me to keep it separate. That instinct had saved me, but the boutique building was different. We bought that together 5 years ago. I'd poured my business into it, and James had poured his money into it. According to Patricia's investigation, he'd used it as collateral for $1 million loan 3 months ago, a loan I knew nothing about. "The good news," Patricia said, "is that he took out these loans fraudulently. He didn't have permission from you or legal authority to do so. That strengthens your position considerably. We can file to have the fraudulent loans nullified." I felt my hands shaking for the first time since this whole nightmare began. Not from shock anymore, but from anger. Real, white-hot anger. "How much are we talking about?" I asked quietly. "Total transfers and fraudulent transactions? Approximately $18 million. $18 million. Not 12. 18. I spent that weekend in my house alone, gathering documents. The deed to my family home. The purchase agreement for the boutique building. Bank statements. Investment accounts. Every piece of paper that mattered. I made copies of everything and stored them in a safety deposit box at a different bank, one where James had no accounts. When he returned from his conference on Sunday evening, he was glowing. His skin had a sun-kissed tone despite the fact that he'd supposedly been in meetings all day. He smelled like her perfume underneath his own cologne. "Good trip?" I asked, making dinner as if nothing was wrong. "Productive," he said, loosening his tie. "Really productive. I think I'm going to expand my portfolio significantly. Might be traveling more in the coming months. Translation, I'm going to be spending more time with her, and I don't care if you know it." "That's nice," I said, stirring the sauce. "I'm happy for you." He kissed the back of my neck, and I forced myself not to flinch. In my mind, I was already 2 weeks into the future, watching his face when he realized what I'd done. The rumors started around the office. James's colleagues mentioned seeing him with a young woman. They'd apparently been spotted at high-end restaurants, laughing together like they didn't have a care in the world. Someone mentioned the condo purchase. By the time the story circled back to me through mutual friends, it had been embellished into something even more humiliating. My husband wasn't just having an affair. He was housing her in a $12 million penthouse that everyone knew was paid for with our money. Some friends called to offer support. Others simply stopped calling. The women at my boutique began treating me differently, with a combination of pity and schadenfreude that made my skin crawl. I was the pitiful wife whose husband was publicly parading around with his girlfriend, but I let the narrative develop. I didn't correct anyone or deny anything. I simply smiled when people asked how I was doing and said I was focusing on my business. The more people believed James had won, the more confident he became. And the more confident he became, the more careless. 3 weeks after meeting with Patricia, she called with news. We've completed the forensic analysis, she said, and we found something interesting. A clause in your prenuptial agreement that James apparently forgot about. I had been 17 when we first married. We hadn't wanted a prenup. We'd been in love and naive. But James's family had insisted. The prenup had been written by their lawyers, and I'd signed it without fully reading it. That had been a mistake. But James had assured me it didn't matter. We were going to get divorced anyway. Except we were. The clause states that any assets accumulated during the marriage through entrepreneurial ventures remain the property of the entrepreneur, Patricia explained. Your boutique is specifically listed as your separate property. Moreover, any debt incurred by one party without explicit written consent from the other is considered non-marital. What does that mean? I asked, though I was starting to understand. It means your business is protected. And it means that the fraudulent loans he took out are his responsibility alone. I felt something shift inside me. The tide was turning. Diana called the next day. I'm filing for divorce tomorrow morning, she said. The judge has already agreed to hear an emergency motion regarding the fraudulent transactions. We're requesting that all assets be frozen pending the outcome of the case. Everything was happening so fast now, moving from preparation to action. James didn't suspect anything. He was planning his future with his mistress, believing himself untouchable, unaware that the ground beneath him was about to collapse. One more thing, Diana said. The court date is set for next Friday. Are you ready for this to become very public very quickly? I thought about all those weeks of silence, all those nights I'd spent reviewing documents and creating spreadsheets instead of sleeping. All the times I'd smiled and played the dutiful wife while James made plans to destroy everything we'd built together. I'm ready, I said. James announced his victory on Thursday. He came home with champagne and told me he'd successfully completed the condo purchase. He kept the champagne in the kitchen and talked about the views from the penthouse. He was so pleased with himself, so convinced that he'd outsmarted everyone, that he didn't notice my silence. This is just the beginning, he said, pouring himself a glass. I've got bigger plans. This whole portfolio restructuring is going to make me even more valuable. I'll finally be free to do things my way. Free. He used that word like he'd been trapped. Like the woman who'd supported him through poverty and business struggles and family tragedy had been holding him back. That's wonderful, I said, and I meant it. Wonderful that he'd finally shown his hand. Wonderful that his arrogance had made him so confident he felt safe announcing his plans. Wonderful that tomorrow morning, Diana's assistant would be walking into his office with a serving notice. He finished his champagne and went upstairs to shower. I sat at the kitchen counter and watched the bubbles in my untouched glass dissipate. Friday morning arrived bright and clear. Patricia called at 8 a.m. The forensic report is complete, she said. Every dollar is accounted for. Every transaction documented. Every lie exposed. He's being served this morning, Diana added when I spoke to her. The court will review the evidence this afternoon. Based on what we have, I'm confident we'll get the asset freeze approved. I got dressed carefully. A navy suit. Professional. Confident. I drove to the courthouse and sat in the gallery as Diana presented our case to the judge. I watched James's face when he realized what was happening. The way his jaw clenched. The way all the color drained from his face when the judge started reading through the forensic findings. Mr. Ashford, the judge said, "You removed $18 million from marital accounts without consent from your wife. You took out fraudulent loans using property that you had no legal authority to leverage. You did this while publicly flaunting an affair. How do you respond?" James looked like he wanted to disappear. His lawyer was frantically whispering to him, but he could barely form words. I was trying to secure my future, he managed. By committing fraud? The judge's voice was ice. The court is freezing all assets effective immediately. Any funds you've hidden will be tracked and recovered. You are ordered to remain in this courtroom while we determine the full extent of the damage you've caused. The press had somehow gotten wind of the case. When I left the courthouse, reporters surrounded me, asking questions about my husband's betrayal, about the fraud, about the affair. Diana had prepared me for this, but nothing quite prepared me for the surreal feeling of having my private pain become public spectacle. I didn't say much. I simply stated that I was grateful the court had taken swift action to protect marital assets, and that I was confident justice would be served. My calm, measured response would later be replayed hundreds of times on news networks and social media. James was not calm. When he finally left the courthouse, he looked devastated. His new girlfriend, I'd learned, was 26 years old. Her name was Victoria. She'd been a junior associate at his firm. She watched from across the courthouse plaza, her face confused, clearly realizing that James had lied to her about his marital status. I felt nothing watching her disappointment. The full story came out over the next week. Diana's team had done its job perfectly. Every piece of evidence was presented clearly, systematically, devastatingly. The text messages James had sent to Victoria, the receipts for the condo furniture, the hotel bills, the jewelry purchases. It was all there, documented, undeniable. More importantly, it was clear that I'd known all along, that I'd prepared methodically, that I'd let him believe he was winning while I was building an airtight case against him. How did you do it? Patricia asked me when we met for coffee after the hearing. How did you stay so calm while everything was falling apart? I didn't stay calm, I said honestly. I was furious, but I learned a long time ago that rage doesn't accomplish anything. Evidence does. Documentation does. Patience does. She smiled. Well, you've got the best evidence I've ever seen. My lawyer was brilliant. By the following Wednesday, she'd gotten a court order that not only froze James's assets, but also required him to return the funds he'd fraudulently transferred. He tried to claim the money was already spent, but the forensic accountants had tracked it to various shell companies and investment accounts. Recovery was inevitable. James's firm launched an investigation into his relationship with Victoria. He'd violated multiple corporate policies by having a relationship with a subordinate without disclosing it. He was demoted, his bonus forfeited, his future at the company uncertain. His parents, who'd written that prenup all those years ago, were furious with him. His father called me to apologize, genuinely devastated by his son's behavior. "I'm so sorry," he said over the phone. "I never imagined James would do something like this." I accepted his apology graciously, though it changed nothing. The condo purchase fell through. Without James's access to funds, he couldn't complete the transaction. The property went back on the market. Victoria disappeared from his life within days, suddenly understanding that the man she'd thought was a billionaire in the making was actually broke, unemployed, and living with his parents. James tried to convince me to settle quietly, to work things out, to give him another chance. His lawyer sent proposals offering me 90% of the remaining assets if I'd simply agree not to press charges for fraud. I declined every single offer. "Let it play out," Diana advised. "You have him completely." By the end of the month, James had agreed to my terms without negotiation. Full custody of joint assets, full responsibility for the fraudulent debt, full humiliation. James's fall was comprehensive. Friends abandoned him. His career was in shambles. The woman he'd risked everything for wanted nothing to do with him. He moved back into his parents' guest house and took a job at a smaller firm, working for people who'd once worked for him. I didn't gloat. I didn't contact him or discuss his downfall with others. I simply moved forward with my life. The boutique thrived. With the legal case resolved, I could focus entirely on my business. I opened a second location 6 months after the divorce was finalized. Within a year, I'd opened a third. My wealth grew. But more importantly, I'd built something that was entirely mine, protected by my own intelligence and foresight. A year to the date after James had announced his victory with that bottle of champagne, I stood in my office and allowed myself to feel the weight of what I'd accomplished. I'd faced betrayal with clarity. I'd responded with strategy instead of emotion. I'd let my evidence speak louder than my pain. There was no joy in his destruction, but there was satisfaction. Deep, bone-level satisfaction that came from knowing I'd protected myself and my future. That I'd been smart enough to see the patterns before they destroyed me. That I'd had the strength to stay quiet while everyone else wanted me to scream. The framed photograph on my desk showed me on my wedding day, young and hopeful and completely naive. I picked it up and looked at it for a long moment, then gently placed it face down. That woman didn't exist anymore. 6 months later, I sat down with a therapist for the first time since the divorce. Dr. Patterson was patient and insightful, helping me process not just the betrayal, but the years of seeing signs I'd chosen to ignore. You survived it beautifully, she said, but survival isn't the same as healing. She was right. I'd been so focused on strategy and protection that I hadn't allowed myself to feel the loss. The loss of 14 years. The loss of the future I'd imagined. The loss of the person I'd believed James to be. Slowly, I started letting myself feel it. And slowly, the pain began to transform into something else. Not bitterness, not revenge, but clarity about who I was and what I wanted from life. I started dating again. Nothing serious, just conversations over dinner with men who seemed interested in who I actually was, not who they could mold me into being. I traveled. I spent time with Victoria and my other friends. I focused on expanding my business into new markets. My life became mine in a way it had never been before. 2 years after the divorce was finalized, I received an unexpected email. It was from James. He'd written a long message apologizing for everything. He talked about therapy, about finally understanding the damage he'd caused, about how he'd spent 2 years rebuilding his reputation and his career. I read it twice. Then I deleted it. I didn't need his apology. I'd moved beyond needing anything from him. His words couldn't change what he'd done, and his suffering couldn't undo the pain. What mattered was that I'd survived, that I'd thrived, and that I'd done both on my own terms. What mattered was that my business now had 5 locations, that I'd been featured in national magazines as an entrepreneur, that I'd built something beautiful from the ashes of my marriage. What mattered was that I was free, standing in my newest boutique location on opening day, surrounded by friends and colleagues and customers. I thought about that Tuesday afternoon when I discovered the condo, about the choice I'd made to respond with intelligence instead of emotion, about every moment I'd stayed quiet, stayed composed, stayed strategic. I'd been told I was being erased. I'd been warned I was being humiliated. I'd been urged to fight back emotionally, loudly, dramatically. Instead, I'd let my actions speak. And my actions had spoken volumes. The boutique around me represented everything James had dismissed as a little shop. It was thriving. It was expanding. It was mine, not ours, mine, built on my vision, my talent, my determination, and my intelligence. I didn't need revenge. I'd needed vindication, and I'd given it to myself. As I welcomed the first customers of the day, I felt truly at peace for the first time in years. Not because James had suffered, his suffering was irrelevant to my happiness, but because I'd proven something to myself that no one could ever take away. I was stronger than my circumstances, smarter than my enemies, more resilient than my pain. And that was enough. That was everything.